designed for the Breslau Plaza, which is to the north, both plazas which are orientated towards the cathedral. The new buildings are grouped around plazas which are at the same level as those around the cathedral, thus allowing walking promenade from Domplatz and the railway station to the Rhine edge without change of level or the crossing of high-speed roads, which high-speed roads together with service roads cover much of the ground surface of the building site. This whole area here is interlaced by a mishmash of service roads, high-speed roads, a kind of traffic engineer's nightmare. Such is testimony to the planner's art. And I'd like to take the occasion of this presentation of these projects to make a plea that maybe the planning profession should be eliminated in matters to do with the three-dimensional design of such things as city centres. I think there is a place for planners, particularly in consideration of resources. But in the past, architects have historically well done the design of three-dimensional buildings, and I think planners could well be eliminated from this process. Gateway buildings, monumental bracket, are positioned either side of the bridge, and semi-enclosed within these buildings are circular plazas overlooked by museum river edge rated shops and the equestrian statues of Wilhelm II and Frederick, a bit bleak but dark, which have for many years stood in the open at the approaches to the Holzrhein Bridge, are repositioned within these plazas. They've come in from the cold. The gateway buildings are like civic balconies or city doors overlooking the Rhine, and from them ramps incline down to the river promenade and the green zone along the river edge. On the museum site, the top four floor volume of the gateway building accommodates the multi-purpose auditorium with seating for 2,000. Enclosed escalators directly connect this auditorium with the entrance hall in the new Wallraf-Richartz-Museum. The no man's land of railway tracks has been screened visually and acoustically from both Museum Plaza and Breslau Plaza by retaining walls, which also support elevated footpaths. These footpaths connect with those on the Holzrhein Bridge, allowing pedestrian crossing to Deutz on the other side of the river. We have treated the edge of the railway zone like a tree-lined canal bank or river edge, and the river, brackets railway, is crossed at two places by footbridge. On both sites, the new buildings make walls which contain and define the plazas, and the height of the new buildings is similar to those of the existing buildings adjoining. Towards the river edge, the height of the new buildings increases to be more in scale with that of the bridge. However, this is at a furthest remove from the cathedral, and the whole complex is subordinate to the cathedral. Now we go on to talk about the specific design of the new building for the Wallraf-Richartz-Museum. And this is quoting from them to us, their program to the architects. They say, the modern museum should be located at the junction of a multitude of routes used by the town population. It should be easily recognizable from the outside and be through an adequate forecourt, easy to find. It is expected of the competitors that they shall work towards ensuring that the main access plane of the museum shall consist of a pedestrian area. Unquote. And in our report, we respond by saying, the new museum can be approached on foot from Domplatz and the railway station on a continuous plaza at level so-and-so. There is connection by lifts and stairs down to 2 levels of basement car parks, etc., etc. The museum can also be approached from the Rhine promenade and river edge by a large ramp which arrives in the circular plaza. The building is in 3 parts: a long gallery wing, an intermediary entrance building, and the gateway auditorium building. The physical appearance of the plaza is determined by a series of architectural elements, including a lean-to entrance hall, bracket, the shop on the corner, bracket, the sloping roof ramp over the entrance gallery descending on the axis of the sculpture court, of the sunken sculpture court, the inclined tubes of free-spanning escalators, and a ziggurat, bracket, electrical substation, marking the footbridge crossing from Breslau Plaza, etc. In the outer entrance hall, bracket, peristyle, there is a large sales counter with museum information, advanced booking, etc. Two ramps, a down ramp and an up ramp, lead to separate foyers, each with cloakrooms, lavatories, etc. This is because in the program they were stressing that the people going to the auditorium were probably not wanting to get involved with the museum, and those going to the museum were probably not getting involved with the auditorium. And so our solution was to make two separate foyers, a down foyer and an up foyer. From the lower foyer, there is entrance to the museum galleries. The planning... Can we go back one, please? Oh, we seem to have missed one. From the upper foyer, escalators rise to the MultiPurpose Auditorium, and the arrival platform serves as a balcony from which visitors proceed to 3 levels of viewing that are interconnected by stairs at the midpoint of each side. This auditorium hall can take exhibitions, concerts, pop music, theatre, conferences, etc. On all sides there are fixed storage units for pull-out bleacher seating, which define a perimeter space that could be used for changing rooms, stores, toilets, etc. From the lower foyer, there is entrance to the museum galleries, all those galleries which are artificially lit, and the planning of the galleries is such as to lead visitors along a preferred route, alternatively to provide access, lift and stairs for those who know what to look for. The preferred route, which goes via all galleries, is commenced past the ticket control box, very similar in setup to the Dusseldorf thing, and leads down a ramped entrance gallery from which there is entry to the outdoor sculpture court, and by a shallow flight of steps around one side of the court into an interior sculpture space, off which is the changing exhibition area. The gallery wing is planned on 3 levels, each with a linear arrangement of partition walls linking vertical circulation cords at either end. As you come round, you go through the galleries in this sort of movement, ending up at this point here on the top gallery. The partition layout of galleries varies, but all relate to the principle that on each floor access is down a side-lit gallery off which the public proceeds into larger and more flexible top-lit or artificial lit spaces. From the upper gallery, adjacent to the restaurant which has views towards the cathedral, there is a mechanically controlled exit door that allows departure only. Never quite worked it out, actually, as to how you design a door which allowed people out but not in. I'm sure it can be done. Leaving the building by way of the ramp into the plaza could be an appropriate finale to the visitor's tour of the museum. It also recalls the lead-off down the ramped entrance gallery. The entry-exit procedures are similar. External surfaces are veneered in reconstructed stone below plaza level with natural stone above. The paving of the plaza and the sculpture court would be of natural or reconstructed stone. Okay, well that ends the main course. Thank you very much. Could we have the lights up, please? I'd be very happy to try and answer
your initial description of your work, it gave me an impression, almost reminded me of the way that the Beaux-Arts people describe their buildings in terms of a kind of morphology, where they talk about elements within a building from the outside looking in. Was your education a Beaux-Arts-like education when you went to school?
Not really, sort of, a little bit. When I started as a student in Liverpool directly after the war in '45, they were still teaching sort of the classical orders, and the very first thing I remember doing at Liverpool was the sort of stretching of a sheet of Whatman on which one rendered kind of column capitals and sections through columns and profiles. But the kind of revolution of modern architecture occurred at that time in Liverpool, 45, 50. And there was a great deal of friction and rioting and so on. A lot of teachers were sacked and students left, went to other schools. And there was the swing over from kind of doing good taste Georgian to outright modern occurred while I was at Liverpool at that time. So while I started my first year doing the orders, I ended my studies doing kind of radical Corb, I suppose. So I don't know whether you'd call that a Beaux-Arts education, hardly.
Who were some early influences of yours? People or ideas?
Well, when the new teachers came in at Liverpool, in the process I've just described, the most important was Colin Rowe, who is a very informed teacher on modern architecture. He was a big, powerful influence in the school. And I would say he was the most influence upon me. And I therefore suppose that Corbusier, and the writings of Corbusier particularly, were the things which influenced me most as a student.
What about as a young practicing architect? Did you continue with Corbu as a role model for yourself?
Well, when I left School of Architecture in '50, I had made my mind up that of the choices which you have, that I wanted to get as fast as possible into private practice. But, like all architecture schools, I'd been through a design course. I had no idea about the building process, how you get a building built. And I decided that the thing I could learn for the next few years was not design, because I thought I was big-headed enough to think I could do that probably better than anywhere I could go, but how to actually get a building built, as it were. And I first of all went to the GLC and tried to get a job there in the sort of Roehampton division, where they were building nice kind of neo-core buildings and so on. But I got into the wrong place where I was filling in forms, so I resigned after a week. Then I went to another firm, which wasn't very satisfactory, and then I went to another firm where, fortunately, I was kind of not exactly put in charge of a job which was actually just starting to go into the ground, but as a senior assistant with a job captain. And then quite quickly, I became the job captain on that particular project. So I then had 3 years. It was a very large building, a very large multi-complex school. I had 3 years dealing with the contractor and the administration and the maintenance and the aftermath and so on. And that was really my sort of apprenticeship, in a sense, in terms of learning how, in England, you got a building built. And at the end of that period, I was starting to do part-time teaching at the AA, thesis tutoring. By that time, I was an associate with the firm. I was a junior partner with the firm, an associate with the firm. And I very fortunately got the first job which came my way, which was as flats at Ham Common. Got it through a student, actually, whose father was a developer and asked his son, who he thought would be a good architect. I just happened to be tutoring his son. And that's how our first job came. So when that came in, I took it and left the firm, set up my own practice.
Could you describe briefly
how
your office works? I mean, how the design in your office works, how you deal with
Well, our office is a very small office. I mean, we've been up to about 25 once or twice, but in the we've been existing since '56, 20 years. But on the main, our numbers are round about sort of 12, 15. Right now, we're down to about 7 or 8. Well, in an office of this size, nothing goes out of the office which isn't known to me, and therefore the kind of design process is initiated by me, and I'm helped by some people in the office. We've always retained about 3 or 4 people in the office right through, not exactly right through, but for long years, actually, for many years, who've been very key people. And on the other hand, we've always had 3 or 4 or more people who are much more transitory, So the kind of key people and myself sort of design the buildings, and then the buildings go into working drawings, and then they get built. And in theory, I would always like a situation where in the office at any one time there was a building being worked on in design, there was a building where the working drawings were being made out, and there was a building where it was actually in construction, So that was kind of the 3 phases of sequence. And theoretically that would be the best state in which one's office could always be, where those 3 things were happening. But of course it hardly ever works out exactly like that. But that would be, for me, theoretically the best sort of situation.
One more question. You were talking about housing, and you would describe the kind of attitude about housing which, say with the major 18th century projects, there was always a uniformity, regularity on the street, and then on the private side, great irregularity and convolutions depending on how the units work. When you design housing, do you design everything, or do you allow user design within sort of the facts of these projects?
Unfortunately not, because all this low-cost housing is central government financed. And you have to make houses which accord to very rigid space dimensions, a thing called Parker-Morris living sizes, and they stipulate, central government stipulates, exactly how big the biggest bedroom, the smallest bedroom, the living space, the kitchen should be. And this produces a very fixed size of living unit, and this is according to family size, 1 person right through to 6 person, family of 4 with 4 children. And none of that is allows for very much for the tolerance or possibility of flexible ad hoc building by the occupiers, which is a pity, but that's the way in which the situation is set up. The theory, of course, is that as the people who live in these houses are totally subsidized by the government, they live there at very, very low rents, actually far below market value rents. But as their family changes in dimension, they move into a nearby but different size accommodation. So there's a certain degree of mobility. If you're a young married couple, you have a certain type of house, and as soon as children start arriving, you're shifted into a bigger one, you see.
All in your buildings, all the expression of the individual takes place within the unit and never on the outside.
And gardens, of course. They have gardens or terraces. But they're not actually allowed to modify the exteriors, because, as I say, it's all kind of rent welfare housing,
Do you think they should be allowed to do that?
Well, I have a lot of reservation about the sort of theory of this, but you have to remember that this is low-cost housing for the kind of lowest paid sector of our society, as it were, It's not middle-income housing. It's what we call working-class housing, or what you call low-income housing, I guess.
Because they don't have much money doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't like to express their own cultural values.
True, I agree, but you have to argue that out with politicians, And housing is very political, One government is only concerned that they built more housing units in their period of office than the previous ones. It's become very much a statistical, political thing, unfortunately, you know.
Your housing is almost frightening for people in this area because it's been such a tradition of diversity and cultural diversity and, you know, housing units here. It hasn't been political, so there's a range of expression.
Would it look frightening to the people who live in Harlem and so on?
It may be more consistent with the fabric with which they've always been living in. Not to say it's optimum, but be more consistent with the older urban areas.
Because, you know, you mustn't project kind of middle class or middle income lifestyle into these.
But one must realize that oftentimes lower class people have the aspirations of middle class. It's sometimes the role of the architect to provide for this.
Yeah. But, you know, if they have those aspirations, they probably, and if they have the income, they wouldn't be living in low-cost housing, you know. I mean, you have to realize this is low-cost housing strictly for the people from Harlem and the ghettos of New York, you know, or rather the equivalent of. It's for people who are unemployed and have and live in sort of desperate slum situations.
What kind of projects do you have in your office now? What kind of new projects?
Well, we don't have very much because, you know, like everyone else, it's rather bleak times. We fortunately have a couple of low-cost housing projects which are keeping us going, but otherwise very little.
What determined the orientation of the building?
You mean whether it faces one way or the other? Well, it originally faced eastwards. And then when the competition was won by us, they found that the University of Cambridge found it didn't actually own the site. So we then had to propel the building upwards and let it drop down again, turning through a right angle in the process and moving over 100 yards to the left, where it just fitted neatly into a piece of site which they did own. So in that process it changed from, as it were, the entrances facing east to the entrances facing north. Well, this doesn't actually make any difference in terms of the kind of environment situation inside the building, because it was not that close fit related to climate or sun movement, you know.
Do you feel the climate control
in the library space, they are, I think, quite successful. They're less successful there's some rooms on the top floor facing west now, which formerly would, in the previous process, been facing north, which would have been better, which do heat up sometimes, somewhat in heat wave conditions. But the library space is quite okay.
Are you familiar with, have you read Venturi's books? I sense some familiarity of you either coincidentally with his work or with a generalized concept of what architecture should be. And what American architects interest you? Is there work being done in America which interests you?
Well, I did a flip through of complexity and contradiction. Otherwise, I haven't read anything by Bob Venturi. I'm surprised you see a similarity.
I feel that both he and you have a fundamental understanding of architectural history and the use of cultural symbolism in buildings, and you place it there consciously as a kind of post-modern doctrine of building.
Well, I hope it's not just he and I who have an understanding of architectural history.
I picked out some of the images in your work which reminded me of his work too, but I was just curious about that.
Perhaps European architects are more kind of historically aware.
Except the Bauhaus people who rejected history.
Except who?
The Bauhaus people who rejected history.
Ah, yes. Well, you know, I mean, I think we're all a bit critical, aren't we, of the Bauhaus and total architecture? Wouldn't you say?
Now, yes, we are.
Yes.
But we haven't been.
No, well, I think I've always been critical of that. Well, since way back, you know.
What
But then maybe the Bauhaus had a stronger influence in America because, after all, it was in a sense transformed over here with Gropius and so on, you know.
Also, it's,
And maybe its effect has lasted longer here.
it's affected, I think, Los Angeles area quite a bit because it's, in a way, it's legitimized a lot of architecture here, which hadn't been legitimized in the world, in the eyes of the world before. What Americans do interest you? I mean, work in America. Are you familiar with Coleman and McKinnell in Boston?
Oh yes, yes.
You must be sympathetic with their.
Not particularly, no. I don't really like their work.
But your work seems.
I mean, I find the town hall thing in Boston sort of gross elephant in Boston. Very destructive, I think, of the kind of identity and memory of Boston, which of course other buildings have contributed to that loss as well. But no, I mean, I'm afraid I don't find their work at all interesting. I don't know. I find, you know, a lot of American architects of the past, like Richardson and so on, whose work I admire greatly, you know, Schindler and so on, you know. But
What about Frank Lloyd Wright?
and Frank Lloyd Wright too. I mean, I came out here in '59 when I was first a visiting critic at Yale, and I came here for about a week, and Craig Elwood lent me his Mustang, and I drove around, and I saw all the Frank Lloyd Wright houses and all the Schindler houses. I sort of systematically did Los Angeles in '59, and I must say I think the Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Los Angeles are really some of the most marvelous, you know. I had all sorts of incidents getting into them, some of which are horrific, but I did manage to get into them all somehow or other by crawling or leaping or dropping or conning. But no, I thought they were terrific. I mean there are certain periods of Wright which, you know, I find less interesting, but the Los Angeles period I think is very interesting.
Are you familiar with the recent Christopher Alexander kind of pattern language approach to design, which?
Yeah, that bores me rigid, that actually. You mean synthesis, etc.
Are you sympathetic with the kind of non-totalitarian kind of design theory which he proponents? In other words, that the user actually replaces.
I would have thought his design theory was absolutely totalitarian. No, that's a dead boot as far as I'm concerned. Even though he's a fellow Englishman. Nice chap too. He just puts out this incredibly dreary stuff.
Have you completed your Cologne job? Is that in completion or in work right now, or what?
These two projects?
Yes.
No, as I say, we didn't win either.
Oh, you did?
They were won by local German firms. You know, the system was they invited 3 international architects, but they were open to German architects, you see. So you kind of had entries of 150, 160. And they were, in both cases, won by local firms, German firms.
In Düsseldorf, what did you do with the existing library wall? You said you saved the south, the one facade of it. What did you do with it? Was that part of the auditorium that you did?
Yeah, the auditorium's in that corner. We saved the facade into Neubrückerstrasse because it was very important, that facade in that street. It terminated the street in a very good way. But then we had the problem of how you go around the corner, you see. So we just crumbled it off on the corner. It was a kind of reference to the fact that the facade always was a ruin, you know, and the fact that, if you like, that it was destroyed in bombing. So as a kind of memento to that fact, which is after all important to the citizens of Düsseldorf, we made it a little ruin on the corner of the plaza, which preserved it intact in Neubrückerstrasse, where we thought it necessary, and made a kind of little nostalgic reference to its demise as if you like, a sculptural object on the plaza. plaza.
Did the pedestrian want to terminate in the cylindrical void?
Oh no, they went through. Yep.
The plaza level, or where did
They went right through the Rattingermauer and came out onto the gravel Platz. It was a walkway right through through the building site.
Was there any consideration given to linking to the arc across the street?
They said in the report to us it would be a good thing if there was a connection. We made a footbridge connection which leapt across the road. We were able to do that because we raised the plaza in height, you see, to separate it off from motor car traffic around its edge. So you got a plaza above the level of the automobile, which was quieter, less intruded by vehicles. At the same time, allowed you to make a physical footbridge connection across to the other gallery.
Well, you're speaking about across to the existing gallery. I meant across to the opera house.
Oh, no. That's a big road, actually. But there was no suggestion in the report to us that there should be that connection. There was not anything they seemed to want in their program, you know.
You were talking about the role of the architect and the role of the planner, and the planner not having much to do with the bodies of buildings. I'm wondering if what you see as, or who you see as responsible for the city infrastructure or the city structure that the architect has to plug into eventually. I'm thinking Milton Keynes and the planning that went into that, and who does that job?
Well, I think that job should be done by architects. I mean, you have a ridiculous situation. It's part of the modern democratic process. You know, you build a new town, which you might compare to how an old town gets built. And in the process of building a new town, the first thing that has to be built is the sewers. So therefore, the committee says to the expert, the sewage engineer, where do you want your sewers? He says, I can't locate the sewers until I know where the roads are, because the sewers always run underneath the roads. So then the traffic engineer becomes the man who makes the first pattern of the road layout. And, things are always being rushed. So he does that. Then the sewer man comes along and puts his pipes in underneath. Incredibly well done, beautiful engineering. The money is fast disappearing. And right in the end of this process is the architect. He has to fit his buildings to the road pattern, which relates to the sewage pattern, and he has the money which is left over from the elegant traffic engineering and water engineering. And this is all kind of arse about face in terms of what the priority should be. But it is a fact of the kind of bureaucratic process of building a new town. And it's quite in reverse to the way historical towns got built, where they built the buildings first, then the roads came later, and then the sewage came last. And that might sound unhygienic, but they nevertheless, to my mind, they built much better towns by that process than they do now by the other process. And that process, the new process, which I described, is always augmented, or if you like, orchestrated by the planner. And it would be much better, I think, if it was somehow handled by the architect.
What do you think would be some of the differences in the layout of cities if the architect did it?
Well, I think if architects had that orchestration to do, that they would maybe change the priorities.
Too much.
Give him a project to do, and then you get an answer.
What's that?
I said, give you a project to do, and you'd probably get an answer. If she entered a competition for a new town design, I think you could give her a better answer. I thought there was some sensitivity to the store in terms of planning, in that you had an imagery of what you wanted first, which is a museum and a plaza, and then you you reworked everything, all of the traffic and all of the circulation to work with that. I think it's, the new town planning, I imagine you're doing the same way, where it would be what the housing or the city itself is, what a person is.
I know, well, it may be here, but I know the new towns process in England, and it's exactly the way I described it as being, unfortunately, the wrong way around. I mean, there's a big housing complex in Runcorn, which we did, which, you know, we were really presented with a gigantic traffic roundabout in which to put a housing community of 8,000 people. And because the traffic engineering, high-speed roads all around is such that it creates an acoustical problem, they build kind of earthworks flanking either side so so that the noise from the motor cars doesn't go into the housing neighborhoods. And this produces the effect that the housing neighborhoods are totally cut off from each other visually and in every way. And in fact, you can drive through the new towns and not know they're there because all you're looking at is sort of sidings, railway cuttings, or earthworks. So, you know, they start off by cutting up the new town into isolated housing communities which are not interrelated at all to accommodate the high-speed motorway, you know. And I would suggest that's a wrong priority. But it's the rational way in which planners operate.
It's interesting to see how your work manipulates technology. You do not seem intimidated by it the way Americans do.
Americans are intimidated by technology? Come on.
I feel they are because almost
how can you conceivably say that? You know, you've gone to the moon and all that sort of stuff. You know.
I was just wondering if you characterized European work as being fundamentally different from American work in that respect.
I don't think so, no. I would have thought the lead should come from you.
Well, I feel that so many American designers have sort of used technology, have used industrial components and industrial processes and visualized them in their buildings to the exclusion of other values. And you seem to reverse that. I mean, Mies van der Rohe or high-tech sort of people seem to show the structure, and the structure really, articulation of the structure and the means of construction really dominate the building itself, almost like...
Well, I mean, buildings are made up of many things more than technology, you know, and according to the building type or the use of the building, I would have thought that the technology might be more or less apparent, you know. I mean, I think there are certain building types where the technology is really irrelevant, but others where it's very important and so on.
I think some current designers, I think of Roach and Dinkel, whom I might compare with your work in terms of scale, types of projects, and use of materials, but their work seems to be more regular and more sort of industrial looking. I mean, they don't manipulate the parts as much as you do.
Less whimsical.
But I think that represents almost an attitude which is not indigenous to the United States. It's interesting to see it still being practiced on a large scale in Europe.
Well, I'm sure your observation is right.
You made the observation in the beginning where in the first part where you were showing building types and you had 4 or 5 different. In what ways do you find it useful to look at a building in this way?
Well, I didn't really look at it this way until I started to prepare this particular lecture.
In what ways do you now look at it as useful?
Well, I mean, as I said last night at the lecture, it's a bit dismaying to find that all one's projects fit into kind of about 5 building types. I mean, we've done over 40 projects, and it's a bit distressing to find that maybe like 5 basic building types is the range. And somebody else made the comment when I was having this conversation with them, well, maybe that's all right, because after all, more Mises work was, I mean, if your building type's number 5, that's probably 3 more than Mises, and 5 more than Walter Gropius's. So maybe it's not so bad. But you know, a building type is a building type, there's infinite variations on the same building type.
It
You
just
know.
would be interesting to go back then and think of Corbusier in that way. I
Yes.
think he had a richness of building types that maybe went beyond 5.
I mean, maybe when you work it out, it's actually quite a small number, you know.
That's why it'd be interesting to look at
Yeah.
things in that way, because we never have.
Yes.
In that they seem to be organizational. They seem to be three-dimensional organizational things. In that they're either a circle with the center as a focal point, or a line with nodal points. But yet they're three-dimensional, which implies much more variety, potential. And it'd be interesting to go back and look at his work and maybe other artists.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thanks very much. What time is it going?
What's cool?
He's up here.
I see him. I see him walking in. Okay.